Hello, my name is Kay Kender, and on behalf also of my co-author Katja Spiel, I'm presenting the paper Social Media as Marginalization Machine, the Trans Desire for Solidarity Spaces. Before I begin a content note, I discuss violence against trans people and other groups in this video. This work is about the experiences trans people are currently having with social media and the experiences they dream of. We talk about why it is so and about how it could be different. So we know it's best practice in tech design not only to put people first and design things participatorily, but especially to include marginalized groups, in theory. However, if you look into the world, technologies are designed with little to no input at all by those who will be using them and those they will affect in general. Something similar is going on in HCI and in academia, where generalistic HCI research is always about people thriving and living their best lives. But when it comes to marginalized groups specifically, it's all about how different and marginalized they are and what harms they experience, and more often than not, about how non-marginalized people can help marginalized people. Like technologies that don't include marginalized people in their design have a tendency to marginalize them further or exclude them entirely, so does research that doesn't come from a marginalized standpoint. So we conducted the following study with an understanding of trans experiences as banal everyday experiences, and under the belief that technologies should be designed for marginalized thriving, in this case, trans thriving. Within this paradigm, we did some design interviews with participants. Design interviews are basically a semi-structured interview with an additional participatory speculative design activity, the aim of which is not to produce proposals or prototypes, but to add nuance to the interview content and possibly open up new insights that may have been less obvious. For the design activity, we told participants to assume social media are magically financed and don't have to be profitable anymore, and are magically built so that they're individually perfect for each person but can still interact with one another. And then we took only the verbal data and did a thematic analysis of that. Before I talk about what we found out, I want to introduce our participants, so let me describe them briefly. Matteo and Jacob are two teenage boys who are joking around with each other. Mika is a non-binary cosmic alien who is laughing. Trash Panda is a sporty female raccoon pondering her sketches. Draf Dracula, which translates from German to down to Cracula, is a vampire werewolf who is putting a spell on a scroll. Helga is an elegantly dressed woman with long curly ginger hair who is drinking coffee. And Sova is a stern-looking young person looking ahead thoughtfully. All participants were white, defined their gender identities as belonging under the trans umbrella, and 6 out of 7 participants were neurodivergent. Ages ranged from 16 to 28 at the time of the interviews. This is just to give you a feel of them as persons. Now on to the findings. First, I want to say, because the thematic analysis is quite rich, I do recommend reading the actual paper because I can only present condensated bullet points here. The first theme was about experiencing violence on social media. So although social media were uniquely important to participants for exploring identities as sources of information and as places to find community, engage with interests, and participate in activism, these things were paid for by our participants in metaphorical blood. One form of violence described by participants was algorithmic violence. This included being bombarded with anti-trans content and witnessing attacks and hate campaigns against other trans people. This not only led to empathic pain and anguish, but also to feelings of guilt when they didn't step in to protect themselves. These kind of experiences led participants to police their own behavior preemptively and forced them to develop coping mechanisms like taking breaks or talking to friends. An example of this is Helga, who watched a single engineering video about a gun, and then her algorithm fed her right-wing people from the USA who were showing off weapons and related techniques. She was very upset at understanding, and I quote, how few gun videos you have to watch before the whole feed ends up made up entirely of gun videos. Importantly, participants didn't want to be protected from such content, but to engage on their own terms. Instead of automations, they therefore desired control through complex tagging systems and searchability. Participants also described how violence against them usually had no consequences. For instance, Trash Panda had her personal more than decade-old Twitter account suspended for inciting violence because she had "every day is Punch a Turf Day" in her username. Meanwhile, celebrities with millions of followers are spewing anti-trans hate daily without consequence. To answer the violence they experienced on social media, Matteo and Jacob invented Frederick, an AI that is friendly but becomes increasingly hostile and aggressive towards users who engage in hate crimes online, at the final stage physically blowing up their devices. which brings me to the next theme, embodied experiences of digital spaces. Experiences of violence happen in spaces that participants considered safe, cozy, and private, so it felt like they were being attacked in their own personal space because the vastness of global publics doesn't align with their embodied experiences of space, leading to dissonance and anxiety. That's why participants increasingly use the big public automated social media only for passive consumption and preferred other more closed off online spaces for active exchange. Importantly, they found community primarily around interests and not around identities. That kind of community usually came through or facilitated by the interests. In the words of Draf Gracula, online spaces should be about what one does and not who one is. So participants wished for platforms that maintain context and positionality and fostered friendly discussion culture and community. They wished for social media with characteristics such as layered and granular publics, profile multiplicity with high control, including anonymity and pseudonymity, and stability. That last point brings me to the last theme, namely changing technologies and shifting spaces. As social media platforms change, experiences between online and offline start changing too. For instance, participants described online disinformation affecting their real lives. And many participants reported, in the context of US dominant content, that while previously they felt safer to be themselves online, this was now reversing. Silva says, I started outing myself, going by this name and these pronouns on the internet, and I find this has now shifted and moved into my real life. But in return, the whole negative part is now present on the internet, because on the streets, I definitely have fewer transphobic interactions than on the internet. So social media are an essential resource, but increasingly threatening violence to trans people, changing and becoming increasingly hostile. They act in a way as marginalization machines where trans people are marginalized in multiple ways. They are marginalized as communities, where an anti-trans content is ubiquitous and enters their spaces with less hurdles. They are marginalized experientially through the current design of big platforms, which leads to loss of control, anxiety, and behavioral self-policing. They're marginalized as creators because the commercialization of spaces, combined with automated content feeds, suppresses them in their content and prefers right-wing content. And they are marginalized by US cultural dominance, which is currently actively working to eliminate trans people. As exemplified by Frederick, the violence trans people experience on social media, while not physical, is very real. And this violence is to some extent encoded in platform design, among other things, through automation, commercialization, and large public single profile structures. Not just for trans people, but for everyone, social media can act as third places, which are defined as small scale, low profile publics that are neither the private home nor the commercialized workplace. Third places allow people of different social identities to mingle around shared interests or activities, within which then social change and democratic negotiation take place. Our participants stress the necessity of such spaces in finding community through shared interests, and there are platforms and online spaces where many of our participants' needs are better met, such as fandom spaces, which have a lot of characteristics our participants wished for. But such spaces aren't dominant because they cannot compete on the market of platform cultural production supported by network effects. In 1998, Ray Oldenburg already was worried about the decline of democracy because third places were becoming commercialized. If we look at what's happening to online spaces right now, we can only assume he is turning around in his grave. Conclusion: commercialized social media suck for everyone, but suck especially bad for trans people right now, and their economic rationale will always perpetuate inequality, rendering them effectively marginalization machines. It's fucked up how, although we tried to take a banal and joyful approach, the conversation mainly revolved around violence. Like many other technologies, although there are evident problems with design features, the underlying issues are social and can be remedied a bit, but never solved by design. At this point, we have a pretty good idea of what kind of social media would be good for marginalized people, but it is just not being implemented. Ways forward include working together for social change, including regulation, policymaking, and activism, and this kind of change happens on many different fronts in many different ways. Thank you for listening to our work, and if you're a trans person in the US, I hope you make it out or through alive, and if you're not a trans person, please be there for trans people.